The night opened like a curtain, slow and velvet, as Milo stepped off the rattling local and into Greybridge Station. The platform lamps glowed with a honey light that did not quite touch the shadows under the iron arches. Lark was already there, leaning on a battered suitcase covered in peeling stickers that looked like paper scabs. She raised a hand without a smile, which was how Lark said she had been worried. Milo breathed out steam and tried to grin. He had promised himself he would look brave. The town smelled of wood smoke and wet stone. Far beyond the tracks, black hills pressed together like folded wings. "You are late," Lark said. "The next train will not stop here until morning, and by morning the archives are closed." He checked the old brass watch he had found in his father's desk, then slipped it back into his coat. The letter had said the archives were open at midnight to those who knew the bell code. 3 short chimes, 1 long. He had not told Lark about the line that followed. "Those who enter must leave as they came, with the truth they brought or the lie they deserve." They left the station. Greybridge sharpened as they walked, street by street, like a sketch filling with ink. Narrow lanes, brick walls stippled with lichen, windows lit by stove flame. Every door carried a small iron charm tied with twine. Lark kept glancing at them. She had lived one summer here with an aunt who spoke to crows as if they were neighbors. Lark said the charms were for luck against forgetting. Milo thought they were for the sound they made when someone pulled them free. "We should eat before we go in," Lark said. "Sugar helps when you read for too long." They ducked into a tiny bakery that had already turned its chairs upside down. The woman behind the counter slid them a wrapped loaf and 2 paper cups of strong tea. She did not ask questions, which meant she knew where they were headed. When Milo thanked her, she touched her throat and said, "Be careful. Not everything in there likes to be read." Outside, they crossed the river on the old stone bridge. The water ran fast, hammered silver by moonlight. Somewhere upstream a fox barked, one sharp note that made Milo's skin prickle. He kept his eyes on the far bank, where a willow leaned over the path. He had dreamt of this willow years ago, though he had never been to Greybridge. In the dream, pages drifted from its branches like leaves and dissolved before they touched the water. Lark broke the loaf and gave him a piece. She chewed fast, the way she did when she was afraid and trying to outrun the feeling. "Tell me again why we are doing this," she said. "Because the letter names my father by his true name," Milo said. "Because it says there is a ledger that proves he did what he said he did, and not what everyone whispers." Lark made a sound that might have been agreement or doubt. "People whisper because stories want to be told, not because they are true." She nudged him with her shoulder. "If we find nothing, we go home with warm bread and the memory of how pretty this place is at night." Milo nodded, but the letter tugged at him like a hook. His father had been a restorer of clocks and a careful keeper of promises, except for the one promise he had broken so loudly it had shattered the family into silence. Milo had been 8 the night of the fire, old enough to remember red glass in the sky and the way his father's hands shook afterward, too young to understand why the town chose a story and locked it to his name. He had carried that weight the way people carry a second spine. The archives stood at the edge of the old quarter. Once a monastery, now a municipal building with a better door and a worse purpose. Tall russet bricks. A roof like folded slate wings. The bell tower leaned a little, as if listening. The main gates were barred with a chain rubbed bright by years of hands. A sign said closed until 9 in the morning. Lark lifted her brows. "You sure about the bell code?" Milo stepped closer to the side entrance where the letter had told him to stand. He felt foolish and a little thrilled. He lifted the brass knocker and tapped 3 short times, then 1 long. For a breath, nothing. Then, from deep within, the bell answered in the same pattern. The chain on the main gates loosened as if the iron had sighed. The side door clicked. Lark mouthed no way, and they slipped inside. The smell met them first. Dust, old paper, oil from lamps long gone cold, something like rain on copper. The entry hall was thin and tall, with walls that held more shadow than stone. The hush felt patient rather than empty, as if the building were waiting for its next line. A man sat at a small desk that might have been carved from a single tree. He had white hair and a black cardigan and a set of metal keys that curved along his belt like a pocket river. He lifted his eyes but not his head. "Welcome to Graybridge Municipal Archives," he said. "You may speak in a low voice or not at all. You may carry no blades and light no flame. You may read what will have you." Lark put the bread on the desk. "Payment," she said. The man's mouth moved into a careful smile. "We do not accept coin after dark," he said. "Food is better." He took 2 slices and set them aside, then gestured toward the hall. "You are here for a ledger, or a name, or both?" Milo swallowed. "Both." The man stood. He moved with a soft economy that made it clear he knew where everything was without needing to look. As they followed, his keys made the smallest song. They passed maps stitched on linen and deeds in glass frames that reflected their faces into odd angles. In one case, a quill sat upright in an ink bottle without tipping, though there was no stand and no string. Lark kept her hands at her sides. Milo's steps sounded too loud to him, and he tried to step softer, which only made his shoes creak. They reached a narrow stair that went down into a cooler dark. The custodian paused at the top. "The truth never arrives alone," he said. "It has cousins and debts. If you take one thing, be ready to be taken along with it." Milo nodded because he did not trust his voice. The stair delivered them into a room that felt like the inside of a clock. Shelves radiated out, curved as if following the teeth of a gear. Each shelf carried ledgers bound in cracked leather. A wind that did not come from any door moved through the aisles and rifled the pages without lifting dust. The custodian chose one shelf and slipped a book free with a finger pressed to the spine. He carried it to a table that had seen so many elbows it shone. "Your father's name," the custodian said. "Speak it." Milo did. The word had a weight he had not noticed before, as if it had been waiting on the back of his tongue. The custodian opened the ledger. The pages did not smell like old paper. They smelled like rain on a road that belonged to his childhood. Lark leaned in and stopped. Her lips parted. "Do you see that?" Milo did. The entry did not simply sit on the page. It drifted a little, as if written on a shallow stream. Letters shimmered as if made of iron filings pulled by a hidden magnet. The first line listed a date that belonged to the night of the fire. The second line listed the name of a house on the hill. The third listed a symbol he had seen once carved into the underside of his father's workbench. There was a fourth line, faint as the echo of a whisper. When he blinked, it sharpened. "Witness, Graybridge Bell." He looked at the custodian. The man's expression did not change. "The bell keeps memory," he said. "It rings for weddings and for deaths. It rings for fires when the watch is swift. When the watch is not swift, it rings anyway. If a thing happens near the tower writes it in the ledger of air." Milo felt heat behind his eyes. He had not expected to cry in front of a stranger or in front of Lark. He bent closer, careful not to breathe on the page. The last lines of the entry were written in a tight hand that did not match the rest. "Strangers took the pane of glass." The watch turned away. The clockmaker stepped into the smoke. Lark whispered, "Keep going." Her voice had lost its edge. She had always believed in the tenderness under stories. She reached for Milo's sleeve, not his hand, as if to anchor him without giving the moment a task. The letters shifted again. The ink stirred and settled into something new, as if the page had been waiting for the right readers. The new lines said there is another book that tells what was said under the willow. It is sealed to a name that is not a name anymore. Bring that name or give one of your own. The custodian closed the ledger with care, his palm flat on the cover. He did not look surprised. "The archives are generous to those who arrive hungry," he said. He slid the book back into the curve of the shelf. Then he pressed a small tag into Milo's hand, a bit of bone smoothed by many thumbs. It was engraved with a symbol that matched the one under his father's bench. "You will need to wake the willow," the custodian said. "It is old and it is stubborn and it sometimes prefers silence. It listens to certain things. Bells. Promises kept." Milo folded the tag into his fist. He could feel the edges. He could feel the night moving above them like a sea he would have to cross. Lark squeezed his sleeve once and let go. Her eyes had brightened with that reckless light that meant she already loved the danger. She nodded toward the stair. "Then we go to the river," she said. "And we make it listen." The river was louder now, a restless animal beneath the thin moon. Lark's boots slipped on the wet stones as she followed Milo down the slope. The air smelled of cold iron and moss. Behind them, the old monastery shrank into shadow, its bell tower a darker shape against the dark sky. Milo didn't look back. He still felt the weight of the bone tag in his palm, and he didn't want to admit that it felt warm. The willow waited on the far bank, its long silver leaves trembling even though the wind had gone still. It seemed to breathe, the way a curtain breathes when someone stands on the other side. Lark stopped a few steps short. "So," she said, "how exactly does one wake a tree that prefers silence?" Milo crouched at the roots. The ground there was soft, as if it had been stirred recently. "The custodian said it listens to names," he murmured. "And bells." "Great," Lark said. "You brought a bell, right?" He didn't answer. The small brass watch in his pocket ticked unevenly, 3 short, 1 long. The rhythm from the letter. He held it up and let it swing on its chain. The ticking grew louder, almost too steady, until it became the sound of something breathing through metal. Then, from somewhere above, the willow sighed. Its branches dipped, brushing the water's surface. Ripples formed and broke into shapes, circles inside circles, like old clock gears turning under the river. Lark's sarcasm evaporated. "Okay," she said softly. "That's new." Milo placed the bone tag at the base of the trunk. The markings on it pulsed faintly, as if lit from within. The tree's bark split open just enough to reveal a dark hollow. Inside, something glowed the color of moonlight through smoke. He leaned closer. "There's something written." Lark grabbed his coat. "Careful. Glowing writing rarely means welcome." But the words were already forming, pale and thin. Milo could just make them out. Ledger 2. Name, Greybridge Bell. Keeper, Riven. Location, below the tolling chamber. He straightened, heart hammering. "It's real," he said. "There's another book. Someone named Riven has it." Lark crossed her arms. "Below the tolling chamber? That's inside the bell tower." She looked back toward the monastery. "You really think we can just walk in there again?" Before Milo could answer, the willow gave another deep breath, and something slid out from the hollow. A small, circular mirror no bigger than a coin. Its surface shimmered with thin lines, like the face of a compass. When he picked it up, it felt almost weightless. The needle spun once and settled, pointing back toward the tower. "That's an invitation," Lark said. "Or a warning." "Same thing," Milo replied. They climbed back toward town, following the path the mirror's faint light traced through the fog. The streets were emptier than before. Windows that had glowed earlier were now dark, and the iron charms on doorways clicked softly in the breeze, each one in rhythm with the watch in Milo's pocket. When they reached the monastery gates again, the chain was gone. The door stood slightly ajar. A single lantern burned just inside, casting a slow golden circle on the floor. Lark exhaled. "I guess they were expecting us." Milo stepped in first. The hall looked the same, but the custodian's desk was empty. On it lay the 2 slices of bread he had taken earlier, untouched. Next to them, a scrap of parchment. "The bell wakes at 2. Bring no light. Ask nothing twice." He checked the watch. 1:53. They reached the stair to the tower. It spiraled upward, stone worn smooth by centuries of feet. As they climbed, the sound of water grew faint and another sound replaced it. A deep, steady thrum that came from somewhere high above. When they stepped into the tolling chamber, the air tasted like copper and rain. The bell filled the room, massive and perfect, its surface etched with thousands of tiny names. A lantern flickered at the base, though neither of them had brought one. Beside it sat a man in a dark coat, his face half hidden. "You must be Riven," Milo said. The man's head lifted. His eyes were the color of steel that had seen too much heat. "That depends," he said. "Who's asking on behalf of the dead?" The bell began to vibrate, soft at first, then louder until the floor quivered beneath their feet. Lark clutched the railing. "Milo," she whispered, "what is it doing?" Riven stood. The lantern flame bent toward him as if drawn by breath. "It's remembering," he said. "It remembers your father." The sound deepened, almost a voice now, carrying shapes of words too old to understand. Milo felt the bone tag pulse once in his pocket, and the watch in his hand stopped ticking. Riven stepped closer, eyes fixed on him. "If you came for the truth," he said quietly, "you'd better be ready for what it takes in return." The bell rang once, low, thunder rolling through stone, and the world around them seemed to tilt. The light went out. Everything else began to move. Darkness folded around them like water closing over a stone. Milo's first instinct was to call Lark's name, but his voice came out swallowed, thin as dust. The air vibrated with the echo of the bell, a sound that wasn't fading but changing, stretching into a hum that seemed to pulse inside his bones. Then, light returned in a strange way. It wasn't coming from a flame, but from the air itself, a dim blue shimmer that revealed the chamber's edges. Lark was a few steps away, crouched with her hands over her ears. Riven stood in front of the bell, his coat swaying slightly as though in a slow wind. "You shouldn't speak until it's done remembering," he said. His voice was quiet, steady, and carried an odd weight. "If you interrupt it, it will start over. And you don't want that." Milo blinked through the pale glow. The bell's surface no longer looked like metal. It had become translucent, and inside it swirled a storm of faint images. People, streets, flashes of fire. He saw the outline of a house on a hill, a figure standing at a window, and for a second he thought he saw his father's face reflected in the curve of the metal. The hum deepened again, and the images faded. The bell stopped moving. Silence poured into the space, thick and heavy. Riven turned toward them. "Now it's done." He knelt beside the base of the bell and pressed his palm to a symbol carved into the stone floor. The symbol matched the one on Milo's bone tag. "You brought this, didn't you?" Milo nodded and handed it over. Riven studied it for a moment, then pressed it into the groove beneath the bell. The stone shifted with a click, and a narrow crack appeared at their feet. Lark stepped back. "Please tell me that's not opening to somewhere." "It's where the ledger sleeps," Riven said. "The bell keeps memory, the ledger keeps truth. They are not always the same." The crack widened into a staircase that spiraled downward into dimness. The air that rose from below was colder than anything Milo had ever felt, like the breath of the deep river outside. Without waiting, Riven took the lantern and started down. Milo followed, and Lark, after muttering something about bad decisions, followed him. The stairs seemed endless, carved into living rock that glittered faintly with quartz veins. The sound of the bell grew softer as they descended, replaced by something else, a rhythmic, low scraping, like pages turning slowly. They emerged into a vast underground hall. Shelves rose from the floor to a ceiling lost in shadows, each filled with books that looked carved from stone rather than bound in leather. In the center stood a round pedestal holding one open volume. It glowed faintly, the writing shifting like the surface of water under moonlight. Riven set the lantern on the ground. "There it is," he said. "Ledger 2. Milo approached, careful not to touch the pages. The letters rearranged themselves as he neared, forming words he could read. A record of acts unseen. Signed in smoke, sealed in blood, opened only for the debt of truth. The air thickened, and a faint outline began to take shape on the other side of the pedestal, someone standing just beyond the edge of the light. Milo felt his heart stop for a beat. It was his father, or something wearing his father's face. The figure smiled faintly. "You found it," he said. His voice was soft, the same tone Milo remembered from nights spent fixing clocks. "But do you understand what it costs to read what's written here?" Milo's throat tightened. "I don't care about the cost. I just need to know what really happened that night." The figure nodded slowly, as if the answer pleased him and hurt him at the same time. "Then read," he said, and the words on the page began to move again, reshaping into a scene, fire, a tower, a crowd running, and a clock striking midnight. Lark whispered, "Milo, something's not right. Look at the edges." He did. The shadows along the walls were crawling, stretching into shapes that resembled hands. The books on the shelves trembled as though breathing. Riven stepped between them and the moving dark. "The ledger doesn't like being watched," he said quietly. "You can have your truth, but you have to keep the attention off it." "How?" Lark asked. Riven turned his head toward her, and his eyes gleamed with something cold and determined. "You distract it." Before either of them could answer, the ground trembled. The shadow hands reached closer, and the pages of the ledger began to burn with blue fire. Milo reached out, too fast, too desperate, and touched the edge of the page. The world exploded in white light. When his vision cleared, the hall was gone. He was standing alone in the tolling chamber again. The bell was silent. The stair behind him was closed. The lantern was out. And in his hand, the bone tag was cracked clean in half. The silence after the light faded was worse than the noise. It had a thickness to it, as if the air itself didn't want to move. Milo stood perfectly still, one half of the bone tag digging into his palm. The crack through it was jagged, warm to the touch, as though it had been alive a second ago. The bell loomed above him, quiet now, yet shimmering faintly with a sheen like frost. The air carried the faintest scent of ash. Lark was nowhere in sight. Neither was Riven. He called her name once, softly, then louder. His voice came back in fragments, bent by the stone walls. No answer. The watch in his pocket began to tick again. Slow, uneven. Tick, pause, tick, pause, pause. He pulled it out and stared. The hands had reversed direction. They were moving backward. For a heartbeat, he thought maybe time itself had undone the last few minutes, but the fractured tag told him otherwise. Whatever had happened below, it had cost something. He took a breath and looked around. The bell tower was no longer quite the same. The wooden beams above were darker, almost charred. The floor had a fine layer of soot. And on the far wall, someone had drawn a symbol in dust, 3 short lines and 1 long, the same rhythm as the bell code. He walked closer. The symbol seemed to hum faintly when he reached out. Without thinking, he traced it with his fingertip. The air cracked open. The tower around him flickered, turning transparent for a second, stone becoming smoke, light bending. Through the haze he saw another version of the same room, cleaner, brighter, and filled with people in uniforms he didn't recognize. They stood around the bell, talking, writing notes. In the middle of them was his father. Milo's heart lurched. He looked younger here, focused, alive. He was showing them something, an engine? No, a mechanism hidden under the bell's base, a network of gears and wires that hummed faintly with light. This will store sound, his father was saying. Not just words, memory itself. The bell won't only ring, it will remember. The vision flickered. One of the men asked something Milo couldn't hear. His father's face shifted, worry, then defiance. The bell behind him glowed brighter, almost too bright. Then the vision warped into chaos. Flames erupted where the gears had been. The bell screamed, a sound like iron tearing. People ran. His father grabbed a small notebook from the floor and looked toward the stairs, toward Milo's direction, and shouted a single word that never reached his ears. The scene froze, then collapsed into smoke. Milo stumbled backward, chest tight. The dust symbol on the wall flared once and vanished. He leaned against the railing, gasping. The fire. The accusations. His father hadn't been the one who destroyed the tower. He had been trying to save something. Or stop it. Footsteps echoed on the stairway behind him. He turned sharply, half expecting Lark. But it was Riven, his coat torn, soot on his face. You saw it, Riven said. It wasn't a question. Milo nodded. The bell remembers everything. My father built it to do that. Riven wiped a smear of ash from his cheek. He did. And he bound it to a ledger, to make sure no memory could be changed. But when the fire came, the bell took more than it should have. It began keeping lives. Milo's mouth went dry. Lives? Riven met his eyes. It doesn't just remember sound anymore. It keeps fragments of the ones who die near it. Every toll traps a piece of them inside. That's why your father tried to shut it down. The weight of it settled like cold iron in Milo's stomach. And the ledger below? Gone, Riven said quietly. It pulled you back here when you touched it. The book's truth is still bound, waiting for the next toll. Milo looked at the cracked tag in his hand. Then how do I release it? Riven glanced at the bell, which was beginning to shimmer again. You don't release truth, he said. You trade for it. The bell always takes an echo. Before Milo could answer, A faint voice floated down from somewhere above, soft, familiar, terrified. "Milo!" It was Lark. He looked up, and his breath caught. She was standing on the narrow catwalk just below the bell, her face pale in the glow. But the shadow beside her wasn't her own. It stretched long and wrong, moving even when she didn't. Riven's expression darkened. She shouldn't be that close. The bell began to vibrate again. A deep tone rolled through the air, and the walls shuddered. Dust rained down. Lark reached toward him. "It's trying to—" The rest vanished under the toll. A blinding light burst from the bell's heart, swallowing everything in gold and sound. When it cleared, Lark was gone. Only her echo remained, whispering his name like the last ring of the bell. The bell's hum died slowly, like a breath stretched to breaking. When the last tremor passed through the stones, the tower was still again. Milo blinked through the haze of dust and light, his ears ringing. The space where Lark had stood was empty, just the faint sway of the catwalk chain and a trace of warmth in the air. He whispered her name once. Nothing answered. The echo that lingered wasn't her voice anymore, just a thin shimmer in the air, fading like fog. Riven stood motionless near the railing, head bowed. His coat was singed at the edges. "The bell took her," he said quietly. "It marked her when she stepped into its circle." Milo felt a raw heat climb his throat. "Then bring her back." "You don't understand," Riven said. "The bell doesn't kill. It remembers. She's still here, just not as you knew her." Milo gripped the cracked tag tighter. The halves fit together roughly, jagged teeth against his palm. "You said it trades echoes for truth. So I'll make it a trade. Her for what I came for." Riven looked at him then, and there was something in his eyes that wasn't pity, wasn't cruelty, but an old, tired kind of warning. "You think it will listen to you? Your father tried that. He offered his name, his craft, even his heartbeat. It took everything and still wanted more." "I'm not my father," Milo said. The bell gave a faint, metallic sigh, as though it had heard him. Its surface flickered, showing reflections that weren't theirs, crowds, streets, soldiers, smoke. And for a moment, in the shifting light, Milo saw Lark's face again. She was calling to him, lips forming words he couldn't hear. Then her image broke apart into ripples of gold. He took a step toward the bell. The floor beneath him vibrated with the rhythm of a slow, living pulse. "Milo," Riven said sharply, "if you call to it, it will answer. But you can't choose what it gives back." "I don't care." He raised the bone tag halves to the bell. The fracture between them glowed faintly, heat bleeding through his skin. He pressed them together and whispered her name, once, then again, slower, as if the sound itself was a plea. The air folded in on itself. A chord reverberated through the tower, deep enough to make the walls breathe. The light burst from the crack in the tag, spilling over his hands. It stung, but he didn't let go. The glow stretched upward, spiraling around the bell like a ribbon of fire. Riven backed away, shouting something Milo couldn't make out. Then a voice, clear, trembling, unmistakable, broke through the roar. "Milo!" He looked up. Lark stood within the light, translucent, her outline flickering between shadow and form. She was smiling in disbelief. "You idiot," she said softly. "You weren't supposed to follow me in." His chest tightened. "You came back." "Not really," she said. "I think I'm only an echo. The bell showed me things. Your father, the fire, what he did to save you." Milo's heartbeat stumbled. "Save me?" She nodded. "He tied part of his name to yours. When the tower burned, the bell tried to take him, but it found you instead. He offered himself to stop it." Riven's voice cut through the light. "She's telling the truth. That's what your father's ledger entry meant." The clockmaker stepped into the smoke. "He gave his time for yours." Milo swallowed hard. The edges of the light around Lark were fading. She seemed to feel it too. She looked down at her hands, watching them blur. "I can't hold much longer," she whispered. "The bell won't let me stay." He reached toward her, but his fingers passed through air that felt cold and heavy. "Then tell me what to do." "Finish what he started," she said. "Free the memories. Break the cycle. or everyone it ever took will stay here forever, including me. The bell groaned again, louder this time, like a storm trapped inside a lung. Lark smiled sadly. You'll have to let me go. He shook his head. No. She gave him one last look, gentle, steady, everything he'd ever known of her courage, and stepped backward into the light. Her form dissolved, scattering into sparks that sank into the bell's metal skin. The hum died away, leaving only the faint sound of ticking. Milo stared at the bell, fists trembling around the tag that was now fused into one solid piece again, its fractures sealed by fire. The surface of the bell rippled once more, showing the reflection of his father's face beside his own. Riven exhaled. Now it's your turn, he said quietly. The bell has given you the truth. But the debt isn't paid yet. Milo turned toward him. Then let's finish it. Riven nodded toward the stairwell. We go below. The last ledger still waits. And as they descended into the dark once more, the bell behind them began to ring on its own, slow and steady, tolling out a count that sounded disturbingly like a heartbeat. The stairwell breathed with cold air as Milo and Riven descended. Each step groaned under their boots, and the echo of the bell above followed like a heartbeat made of iron. The air smelled of dust and ozone, as though lightning had once lived here. The deeper they went, the more the sound of time changed. The ticking he'd heard in his father's watch no longer matched his pulse. It synced instead with something older, steady, patient, waiting. Riven walked ahead, his lantern barely pushing back the dark. It's waking now, he said. When the bell tolls without a hand to strike it, the archives start to rewrite themselves. Your father tried to stop that once. Milo's voice was rough. Then I'll finish what he couldn't. Riven gave a short, humorless laugh. That's what he said too. They reached the bottom of the stair, where the air thickened into mist. The floor beneath them was smooth stone veined with faint light, pulsing like veins under skin. The shelves they had seen before were gone. In their place stood a single pedestal, taller than before, carved with the same symbol that had marked his father's ledger, the gear within a circle, half broken, half whole. The book resting on it was unlike the others. It wasn't bound in leather or stone but in something that looked like tempered glass. Inside, words swam like trapped smoke. Milo approached slowly. This is the final ledger? He asked. Riven nodded. The bell's own record. Every life it's taken. Every truth it refused to forget. Milo reached for it. The moment his fingertips touched the surface, the glass pulsed with heat. The words inside surged upward, forming lines and names, each glowing faintly before fading. He caught flashes, faces, voices, fragments of last words. And there, among them, Lark's name shimmered faintly before sinking back into the mist. His throat tightened. She's in there. Riven placed a hand on the pedestal. Then she can still be freed. But only if you release the bell's memory. Milo frowned. How? Riven hesitated. By giving it something new to remember, something stronger than everything it's holding. Milo turned toward him. What do you mean? The bell holds echoes of those who died near it, Riven said quietly. To break its memory, it needs a living one to replace them. A name willingly given, bound to time itself. That's the exchange your father refused at the last moment. He gave himself instead of his name. That's why the curse stayed. The realization hit like a blow. Milo understood now what Lark meant. Finish what he started. It wasn't about unlocking the ledger. It was about ending the bell's hunger. He stepped closer to the pedestal. If I give it my name, will it let the others go? Riven's jaw tightened. Yes. But you'll vanish from memory too. You'll become part of what holds it closed. Milo looked down at his hands. The tag in his palm was still warm, the engraving glowing faintly with his father's symbol. Maybe that's enough. Riven's voice softened. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, Milo said. He gave his time for me. She gave hers for the truth. This is what's left. He placed the bone tag on the ledger. The glow spread across the surface like fire through frost. Then he spoke clearly, his voice steady. My name is Milo Gray. Let this be the last sound you keep. The moment the words left his mouth, the light exploded. The floor rippled under his feet, the mist spun upward, and the bell's toll above turned into a low, human sigh. Everywhere around them, the air shimmered with dissolving shapes, faces, silhouettes, fragments of voices breaking free. He saw Lark again, clear this time, smiling without fear. She reached out her hand toward him, but there was no more weight to it, no more need. "Milo," she whispered, "you did it." Then she faded and the light with her. Riven stood alone in the silence. The pedestal was empty now, cold and still. The bell above no longer tolled, its echoes had stopped. The only sound left was the soft rush of wind through the cracks in the old stone. He looked down. Where Milo had stood, there was only the broken watch, its hands frozen at midnight, its ticking finally ended. Riven picked it up, closed his fist around it, and whispered, "The bell keeps memory." The man kept his word. When he left the tower, dawn was rising over Greybridge. The mist had lifted, and the willow by the river swayed in a gentle breeze. Its branches shimmered faintly, as though they remembered a boy's promise and a girl's laughter, and the sound of a bell that finally fell silent. Greybridge woke slowly, as if the town itself were trying to remember how mornings worked. The first sunlight broke through the fog, painting the cobblestones gold. Bakers opened shutters. A milk cart rattled down the lane. Children chased one another past doorways hung with rusted charms that no longer chimed. No one mentioned the bell tower. The old monastery stood silent at the edge of town, its doors unlocked but unused. The air around it felt cleaner, lighter. Where the bell once hung, there was only an empty frame open to the sky. Pigeons perched along the beams, unbothered by ghosts or memory. Riven sat on the steps, the cracked watch resting in his hand. He had not slept. The town square was filling with people who seemed unaware that anything had changed. They greeted one another with easy laughter, names flowing off their tongues as if the night before had never existed. But there was something missing in their speech, a faint hesitation when they talked about the past, as though a page had been torn neatly from their shared story. He wound the watch once out of habit. It didn't tick. The silence felt final. The door behind him creaked. The custodian from the archives, the old man in the black cardigan, stood in the doorway, his eyes brighter than they had been. He looked at Riven, then at the sky. "So it's done," he said. Riven nodded. "It's done." The custodian stepped forward and sat beside him. "Strange, isn't it? The town feels lighter. Like we've all been holding our breath for years and finally exhaled." "They don't remember him," Riven said. His voice was rough. The old man gave a thin smile. "That was the price. A name given to keep the others safe." Riven looked toward the river. The willow branches shimmered in the breeze, scattering flecks of light across the water. "He's still here," he said. "Not as a ghost. As something simpler. The bell may have forgotten, but the wind hasn't." The custodian followed his gaze. "And the girl?" "She's gone with the rest," Riven said. "Freed." The two men sat in silence. A bell far away, one from a church across the valley, rung 9 times. The sound didn't echo the way it used to, it just faded softly, like rain into soil. Riven rose to his feet. "I should go." "Where?" He looked down the hill toward the railway that cut across the far fields. "There's always another town, another archive. Stories don't stop just because one has been quieted." The custodian nodded. "Take this," he said, handing him a folded slip of paper. "It was in the desk this morning. No one remembers putting it there." Riven unfolded it. A few words written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. "For the next keeper. If the bell ever rings again, listen for the name beneath the sound. It will be mine." Below that, a single signature shimmered faintly, then faded before Riven could finish reading it. He closed the paper carefully. "Thank you," he said. The custodian smiled. "Be well, Riven. And remember, truth never dies. It just changes its handwriting." Riven slipped the paper into his coat pocket and started down the road toward the station. The morning light caught the watch in his hand, glinting off its cracked glass. He thought for a moment he heard ticking again, faint and steady, like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm. He didn't look back. Behind him, the monastery bell tower stood silent. The willow by the river bent in the wind, whispering across the water like the turning of pages. And somewhere deep within the hush of Greybridge, a single faint chime rang, soft, distant, almost human. Not a warning. Not a memory. Just a promise kept.